In our last two chronicles, we talked about China's demographics, its tens of millions of interprovincial migration workers, and the social, political, and economic implications of this mass migration. About the minor but significant political reforms China has undergone. So today, we'd like to find out more about China and talk about the interactions between events in Europe and East Asia. Ulrich, why do you think it's important to pay attention to the interactions between Europe and East Asia, and what can or should we learn from it?
Nice to see you again, Chris, and let me elaborate a little bit. I think that after the end of the Second World War, both countries in Western Europe and in East Asia have been strongly focused on their relationship with the US, with the effect that in this triangle between the US, the EU, and East Asia, the link between Western Europe at the time and East Asia was the weakest link. Then I think this pattern has remained valid in spite of the resurgence of Europe after 1945 and also in spite of the rise of China. On the other hand, I think more recent developments like the Russian aggression in Ukraine show, and many analysts also underline that there is a strong link probably between what's going on in Ukraine and what might happen in the areas surrounding Taiwan.
Okay, but how strong is the interaction between the two regions, and when did it start?
Actually, it's historically very interesting because I think this action goes primarily back to the times of the Empire of the Mongols, because you would have, a free flow of goods and knowledge, let's say from Central or Eastern Europe up to the end of the East Asian continent. And this, I think, was very well illustrated by the book on the journey of Marco Polo. As you know, we are not 100% certain that the journey took place, but still it had a huge impact, I think, on the knowledge in Western Europe about East Asia. And actually, there's also a very interesting side aspect to it, which clearly underlines, as I would say, the negative aspect of globalization that many people don't know, and I didn't know up to very recently either, that the plague, this horrible disease spread in Europe, but its origins were, it seems, in the eastern province of Central Asia. So any parallel might just be,
Okay. Can we go back to periods closer to the early 21st century, and what were these key events that linked us closer together?
Look, clearly, I think at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, we had this first era of globalization, trade, relatively unlimited liberal trade between countries, a strong rise also in the wealth and prosperity. And then we clearly had this very unfortunate First World War. And the interesting thing, however, is that there was a strong interaction then in 1919 in particular between the so-called May movements in Korea and China and what was going on in Europe at that time. And even in the 1930s, we say clearly the very similar pattern moving again between, what's happening in Germany, what's happening in Japan. And this only ended with the surrender of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan in 1945.
Okay. Well, with considerable parts of Europe and East Asia in ruins after the war, how did things develop in 1945, after the war?
Yeah, actually it's really surprising because after that period, after the end of the Second World War, you really see a very strong interaction between these two areas. Because I think the very good example is that the coup d'etat in Prague, which kind of marked the beginning of a Soviet attempt to dominate at least Eastern Europe, it was followed in East Asia by the establishment of two states on the Korean Peninsula. And it had, in the very same year, and it also the impact that, for example, in Japan, some war criminals were released from prison because the US decided that it was necessary to make Japan a reliable ally against worldwide communism. So, on the other hand, we have this kind of counter movement then starting with the Korean War. As before, as I said, it was more events in Europe having a strong impact on East Asia. And then with the beginning of the Korean War, the opposite. You have the attack by communist North Korea on the southern part of the peninsula. And the impact has been that the US immediately committed new troops to Europe, and then we had the expansion of NATO to Greece and Turkey, and in 1955 also the membership of Western Germany in NATO. So there's a very clear link there between Korean War and developments in Western Europe.
And where do we stand today with the current developments, do you think?
Yeah, it's again amazing to see that there's a very similar development going on nowadays, because following the Russian aggression in Ukraine, President Biden has made a very clear statement that the US would support Taiwan, and I understand militarily, in case of attack by mainland China. And I cannot remember any US president making such a clear commitment publicly to the security and independence of Taiwan. So this is pretty clearly linked, as I said before, to the developments in Ukraine. And President Biden wanted to make clear that the US, in spite of being somehow engaged in Ukraine, is still fully committed to the defense of its allies and non-publicly declared allies in East Asia. So, and if I may add a final aspect to it, I believe that people in Zhongnanhai, which is the kind of Chinese Kremlin, they are very closely following also which sanctions the West has imposed on Russia and at which point of time and with which efficiency, because they clearly will want to deduct conclusions for their future strategy towards what they consider the reunification of mainland China with Taiwan. So, to make a long story short, I would say the interactions between Europe and East Asia have a really long and rich and fascinating past, and they have been getting more intense and direct with the rise in globalization.
Ulrich Jochheim, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for your insights and your analysis. It's clear that China's economic weight as the world's largest trading power and manufacturer gives it significant political leverage internationally. Recent globalization has intensified the interactions between Europe and East Asia, and we'll all be following closely, no doubt, to see what further developments take place. We're now wrapping up the China Chronicle, but please stay tuned for more EPRS Chronicles, and thanks for listening.